All right. It is now recording. Okay. Joined by Ryan Greene, who writes, translates, makes, and caretakes books in Phoenix, Arizona, the city where he grew up. And I will now turn it over to Ryan.
All right, cool. Thank you everybody for coming. Um, yeah, it's really exciting to get to be able to share with folks and also to get to share with many friends and family. My parents, it looks like, are both here. Not typical that I'm sending out the invite for the things I'm doing in terms of events. So thanks for coming. I'm not sure this will help explain anything of what I do with all my time, but hope that you'll enjoy it. As a quick test before I sort of go any further, I just want to make sure that what I'm writing is showing up correctly and I don't need to do some sort of mirroring.
It's showing up correctly.
Okay, cool. Got some wondering and some wandering.
Beautiful.
All right. So we'll begin here with wondering and wandering. I grew up in a place like this. This is Phoenix. 50 years ago in 1974, part of a strange book that I found called What Are the Options That Appear to Exist with Respect to Mobility, Lifestyle, and Urban Form in the Further Development of Metropolitan Phoenix? There's a lot of open questions here, but a thing that I know from looking at this view is that I live here in a grid. I live here in a place of straight lines, of boxes, of an assumption that I have an A and I have a B, and all I need to do is go straight or turn perpendicularly to get there. I'm interested in thinking about the ways in which, as people living wherever it is that we might, artists making whatever forms of art we might, we inherit all sorts of squares. We're given many squares that perhaps have the chance, when we turn them, to become a diamond. This is a little strange because I don't like baseball anymore, but as a kid, I definitely did. Here's a bit of proof. Me as a child, I took this from the fridge yesterday when I was visiting my parents. We can see here that I have a Ryan Greene, first grade, Mercury Mine Star Reader, 2001. This is a picture that I sent to the shortstop of the Arizona Diamondbacks in 2001, the one year that they won the World Series. His name is Tony Womack. Um, their colors at that time were purple and green. My last name, Greene, I thought had to be my favorite color. Of course, I still like it. Now purple is my favorite, so I'm exploring what that might mean. Um, in baseball, there's something strange about a diamond made of these squares, these bases. The biggest goal is to run around right back where you came from, to start and return where you were. Just now for dinner, I ate the same thing I ate for breakfast to end my eating day, starting where I began. In the same way, although I don't like baseball anymore, I'd like to start this talk by returning to the Diamondbacks, to a rattlesnake that perhaps we can bring here to think about who some of the thinkers are that I have in mind when I'm making books that have changed the way that I think about myself in place and in relationship to text, in relationship to objects and to community. Let me do this one. I've got here some people to think about and some words that go with them. I'll start with the center of this sort of spiral of questions, Camila Janan Rashid. Camila Janan Rashid is someone who helps me to think about leakiness and porousness in the ways that boundaries or borders between texts and times and spaces and ways of languaging may blur, may shift, and that those things can be in conversation in ways that move us. We move to Octavia Butler, who's on this matchbox, painted by my friend Jeff at Palabras Bilingual Bookstore. Can use it, whoops, can use a match from this box to light a candle. My friend Mary Hope made to have something to sort of keep grounded in the midst of this reading. Here's Mary Hope's candle, which I can put inside this green and purple bowl that my friend Maya made. And that is a really interesting mirror of a bowl that I made as a child that I have not been able to find. I'll have this candle over here.
Your mom probably can find it.
Yeah, she probably could. 3 seconds, I'm sure. Um, okay. So Octavia Butler is somebody who Camila Janan Rashid talks about as thinking about primitive hypertext and the ways when we have multiple books in our lives, they might talk to each other in ways that change the possibilities of how we think, the ways that language moves. Mary Hope Whitehead Lee, who made this candle, is a dear, dear friend of mine who reminds me always that we don't even birth ourselves, thank you. So from the very beginning, ever from the start. Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad. Um, we're in some form of collaboratory practice, in some form of laboratory practice, where we can experiment and try again and again, coming back to where we've started, new again together. Also, hey, Mary Hope, I think you may be here. I saw. Hi. I think also about Douglas Kearney, who in his texts, if you've seen them, his poems that look like many things that may or may not be poems remind us that to read is to perform, whether we open a book that opens in ways we expect, read a poem that looks in ways we expect, or read or open a book that opens and reads in ways that we do not expect. Every time there's a choice in how we engage. And there are ways as we design books to invite certain types of choices. I think also after Douglas in Alt Text as Poetry, which is a project that reminds us that every choice we make in design has other choices behind it, other choices that allow certain choices and certain access points for engagement. Alt Text as Poetry thinks about access not as a prerequisite or not as a box to check off, but rather as a point of possibility and generative community departure. Laurel Schwartz, one of the people who designed the website for Alt Text as Poetry, is someone who reminds me to think about, oh, I don't have the little thing here. Here it is. About home, about a book as a home, and her words often referenced an essay that she wrote about creating a house next to a river of knowledge in thinking about a website. And I'm interested in the way that Laurel's thoughts of home for text, home for books, can extend beyond paper and beyond the page into new types of current and flow. In the same way, I think about Chia Amisola, who, where are we here with Chia? I'm not sure where this little piece of paper went, but Chia thinks a lot about ambience and thinks about love. Oh, here we go. Yeah, the things that we make are reflection often of the things that we love and the ways that we love. And I hope in my practice of bookmaking that there's a way for that love to transfer and to be clear. Nicole Cecilia Delgado, the last name is Diamondback, is somebody who absolutely, fully, and completely stands in for me for community and thinking about publishing as a community practice. Nicole has run a number of projects and currently is one of the two people who runs La Impresora in Isabela, Puerto Rico. It's an absolutely beautiful project, and if you're not familiar with it, please check them out. And I hope someday that they'll be able to present here so I can learn even more from them. All right. I'm feeling a little bit more grounded and ready to wander together. Again, where did it go here? I come back to this. I live here in a grid. I'm interested in ways we might move between one point and another that are less direct, that don't assume or seek linearity. In doing bilingual book design or multilingual book design, there's often an experience that I've had and that I've witnessed in others where we have an assumption of where we're moving. I know English, I'm moving to the English text. There may be some other text there, but I don't linger in any ways. I simply pass over it and move to what I think I know, which I think comes to a question about not knowing. This is a journal entry from a little while ago, and I began thinking about how I've been thinking about not knowing as a form of opening, how the uncertainty makes room for ways of being or moving that feel unfixed, generative, or generous. Here, after some various thoughts, when I don't know, I try. When I try, I'm in flux. When I'm in flux, I'm open. When I'm open, I receive. When I receive, I give. So not knowing can become an encouragement for reciprocal generosity. Here to another point of grounding and thinking about translation, which is deeply connected to, for me, an understanding of books. J.E. Hoffer and J.D. Pluker wrote, when they were part of a collective called Antena Aire, a manifesto for ultra translation. This is a project that has shaped a lot of my thinking about translation as an act that is not about carrying one thing from another place, but is rather about a certain type of engagement that is interested in correspondence rather than equivalence. I'm interested here in correspondancing as well. Here we'll say also that in the words of J.E. and J.D., we recognize how translation has been used, is used, and might still be used as a tool of conquest, assimilation, or domestication. We're committed to creating translations that are racinated in the culture's dialogues, conflicts, battles, struggles, hierarchies, gossip of their communities of origin. We recognize this is a difficult, perhaps impossible task, and yet we have high hopes, impossible hopes, untranslatable hopes. Ultra translators bent on unsettling the empire of English. Ultra translation is a process of working against languages that seek to dominate. In that spirit, I'm interested in thinking about what is already written into the books that we read that exist in multiple languages. Often, a book will be split in two. We'll have text on one side, text on another, in one language that is presumed to be read first, in one language that is presumed to be read second. These are texts that are split, not always in a bad way, but split in a way that allows for a certain type or encourages a certain type of analytical reading or a certain type of glossing over. But I'm interested in my own practice with multilingual book design in disrupting. As may be clear, this talk is not going to be chronological in looking at all of the books that I've made or the designs that I've explored one by one from the start to the end, but it'll be a wandering between them. A recent project here is working with a poem from, let me see if this light we can change a little. Here we go. Working with a poem from Yaxkin Melchy from his book, The Green Sun, which is part of a larger project called The New World. Here we have 3 lines. Abre la mano, eres un cuerpo de tierra, un árbol y dos seres que vagan en el tiempo. We can let the sun in through the blinds, and we can find another language waiting. Open your hand, you're an earth body, a tree and 2 beings wandering through time. I'm interested in what it might mean to be an earth body, a tree, to be wandering, to be open. And I think about the ways recently in translating Yaxkin's work from that time, I've been thinking about how to have the text orbiting in some sense. This may be hard to see, but there's a star here at the center of each page. The text can be in some sort of a relationship of mutual orbit. In translation, this is the translator's note from this little book that just came out with Ethel, was co-designed with Sarah from Ethel. Little translation note that's interested in correspondence and also in correspondence says, as I've been translating these poems, or I guess this multi-part poem by Yaxkin, it's felt like we've been dancing, or maybe that I've been watching him dance with someone I can't see. And I've been trying to match the shuffle of my feet and the sway of my weight so I can dance along. As I've worked to make books that have multiple languages that disrupt presumed hierarchies of reading order, of priority, I've been interested in that same process of watching the poems to look at what they might be dancing with, how their bodies are moving, and how in creating a book I might participate in that dance, extend that impulse. This is a project from a couple years ago that is a book by a poet from Argentina named Tamara Grosso. And this was co-translated with some of my dearest and closest friends, Mary Hope Whitehead Lee, Claudia Nunez de Vieta, and published in a project that I called No Good Home that I do with a friend named Neil. We'll take a quick pause to share here. Oops, here we go. All right, I've shared now. To share here this poem by Claudia from quite some time ago. It's about our experience of making books together in the Cartenera Collective, which is a project of Cardboard House Press, a publisher of bilingual poetry. Some of my first encounters with books is a handmade thing that we can do, making made with materials that we have access to in our daily lives, in elementary schools, anywhere we might find ourselves, paper, string, glue, cardboard. Claudia is one of my dear friends from that context and now beyond. And she says, un libro es como un abrazo o una danza. Tomo una mano del libro y luego la otra y juntos vamos. A book is like a hug, like an embrace, like an arm wrapped around you, or a dance. I take the hand of the book, I hold its hand in my own, interlacing our fingers, and then the other hand, the other fingers, and together we go that way together. Okay, screen sharing has stopped. That's positive. We're back where we should be, where we began again. So here, this book, Márgenes, co-translated. The book itself is a series of poems that Tamara wrote in the margins of other books. In her book, each poem is surrounded by the name of the book in whose margins it was written. The question when bringing this book into English and to present it bilingually was how to keep some of that dance at play, how to follow those steps. Here, the decision that we made was to make the English and the Spanish exist in each other's margins. To read the English text, the presence of the Spanish is always there. To read the Spanish text, the presence of the English is always there. And to look at the book as a whole, each of their margins becomes the center of the design. It requires a type of turning, of taking turns, of working together around and around to decide how it is that we might say what it is we're hearing. In the spirit of hand holding, I think also, oh wow, this is very bright. Let's see if we can reach a space of less brightness. This may be hard to see, but this is another little tiny book with Yaxkin, the first seed to come out of the New World as we were working together. And here I think of this design as one where the English and the Spanish are in slightly different fonts, slightly different styling, slightly different colors, and it feels as though they're interlacing. Or again, I live here in a grid. It maybe is a zipper merge. We're driving our cars onto the highway to go somewhere together. I'm thinking about other ways to interlace, not at the level of the line, but perhaps at the level of the page. This is another co-translation, another collaboration, time spent experimenting together with Claudia, Mary Hope, our friend Brianda, and the poet Cristina Guzman, who lives in Puerto Rico. In this book, The Body of the Poem of the Body, El Cuerpo del Poema del Cuerpo, we're able to move through the poem one couplet at a time, each page having both languages, but without an equivalence, a correspondence. The body of the poem sings as it flees. The body of the poem celebrates its desire. The body of the poem is hot and breathes. The body of the poem goes in for an autopsy. The body of the poem feigns compliance. I'm interested in my own bookmaking practice, in feigning particular types of compliance, but ultimately not complying to what I don't yet know, but have been told that perhaps I'm supposed to want to do. I think of this book, Transit by Claudina Domingo. This particular section from Transit, 7 poems, was published a couple years ago called Impossible Hours or Horas Imposibles. And this was co-designed with Lucy, who runs the press Death of Workers Whilst Building Skyscrapers. And in this translation, we were interested in how to allow the English and the Spanish to have their own lives in the book, to not ask them to do work that perhaps was not theirs to do, but also to allow them to cacophonize. This is a book of a city, of Mexico City, and the ways life and language and history is layered. Here, the decision was made to print all of the Spanish text on transparent paper and all of the English text on sort of typical white paper. With the text overlaid, the words become unreadable. They become something more like a cityscape. We can see the blocks, the buildings, the intersections overlapping. Mexico City, though, provides us with smog, which can actually provide us with clarity. And so the smog backdrop can allow us here to read the Spanish, if we so choose to, only the Spanish at one time. This is a book that also helps me think about how the word on the page can connect to a word somewhere else in the cloud, which itself is a metaphor for what is truly, in fact, the earth, elemental. I'm reminded, and I will briefly grab, for your patience, of 2 gifts from Kathy, who's here, who also makes beautiful, beautiful books on cyan, which allows us with transparency and text to look at the sky and to find the blue that we might be truly seeing above, but also to hold in our hands a phone made from the earth, which all phones and all of our technology always have been, always will be, always are. But to return to Impossible Hours, this is a book that connects us to the cloud, to the space of the internet as something that might allow us to see or to hear something a little different than what we had heard or seen before. This particular poem, Soledades, takes place on a certain route through the city in Mexico City. To accompany us on that route, I created a sculpture which we have some photos of here on mirrored acrylic. Again, here I'm reminded of Kathy. Of mirrored acrylic, where the poem in English and Spanish is divided into stanzas. This for me felt like an outgrowth of an impulse I'd had earlier with a poet named Ana Belén Lopez in a poem called The Dream, in which each line existed on its own mirrored acrylic that was laser etched, so that as it rotated on a central axis, or eje in Spanish, a central avenue of thread, we might turn and spin around. We can go here to see videos as well, which I can try to share. We'll see, my computer is being a little fussy with sharing. Sharing video before. We'll give it a try. Okay. Hopefully that worked. If it did not, I can say there were spinning mirrors with text in English and Spanish in the place of the poem. Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up that perhaps it worked. And the thought there is that perhaps the book too can participate in the landscape that produced it. Perhaps too the book can reflect back to us ourselves as we read it, reflect back to us the worlds around us as we read. And perhaps too the book invites a reading that doesn't allow for a straightforward, clear, linear, cityscaped, manicured reading. I think here again are the ways we might not be sure. This is a poem, but not a book, but a way I've thought about the clarity that sometimes is felt in the question between yes or no, and the ways I'm interested in, for myself, choosing additional options. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, and it's no, and it's no, and it's no, yes, no, yes, no, no, yes, yes, no, yes, no. Here in the spirit of not choosing, this is a project that began in 2019, eventually came out in 2020 in a very different moment than where it began. It was a collaboration with four incredible writers here in Phoenix, some of whom are here. And again, a project of co-translation. It was called 4M. Its name was a question of if form could in fact itself be a forum. Was a way to think about how four books might fit into an M, how a cover with the clouds of the skies where we were living overlaid with the cloud of the QR codes that push us to hear or bring us to hear the audio of each other reading each other's poems might afford us a way to have four of us in one way here together. Here, azul, aquí, blue, this poem by Marlin, and this particular one coming first, followed then by the same poem, aquí, blue, here, azul, flipped over in reverse, along one of the four sides that paper so often affords us. Here we can move to a second side where we find blue here by Raquel Denis and azul aquí by Raquel Denis. We can move to our third side and we find again another opening on Being of the Earth, Uterus Heart by Antonieta Carpenter Cosan. And flipping over Estar de Tierra, Útero Corazón por Antonieta Carpenter Cosan. And finally here, Omeoto, Divine Duality by Mary Hope Whitehead Lee, or Omeoto, Dualidad Divina by Mary Hope Whitehead Lee. Here there was a question of how to fit four texts, how to allow them each their own space, but to afford an impossibility of anything other than reading together. Here there was the question, over the course of an edition, what hierarchies or implied orders might be disrupted. In each book, there was a different order of placing these texts. In each book, a different alternation between the languages. And so as a designer of books, I think often not about just the single book that we might make and the choices that are held there, but a range of choices that can happen over the course of a book's life. In this case, the book's life includes the time we spent talking before in 2019, the time we spent talking together in 2020, the time we spent talking, finding new ways to be together in 2020, together again, apart. In 2020, when the book came out, we were able to extend it beyond its physical form in the ways that we all had already had to find new ways to extend ourselves beyond our physical forms. And I can share here briefly a bit of that extension, a bit of that invitation. Okay, we'll go back to screen 2. You can explore my email. And this is part of a bookmaking project that I've been doing with my friends here, Mary Hope and Claudia in Phoenix, for the past several years. It began with a book that I am hoping to find. Well, I'm struggling to find it, but it began with this book, America Tienes Mucho Que Hacer, America, You've Got a Lot of Work to Do, with Chava Magana, who runs Palabras Bilingual Bookstore, who reminds us again and again that to read is to be in community. The fifth book that we made as a part of this project was 4M, which we've looked at in physical form and here in digital form. We asked similar questions about how to extend the bilingual impulse, the bidirectionality, and the indeterminacy that hopefully it can hold and allow for. Here we have each of the poems that you can download and read for free. Oh, wow. Computer's having a bit of trouble, but we'll give it a second. Allows for an open reading. We have readings of the poems by the various people who wrote them, reading their own poem, reading translations of the other collaborators' poems. We have here some reflections and paratext, which to me is always part of the text including, extending, and encompassing more than whatever is said to be linearly the text, our destination, where we're supposed to go, where we're supposed to want to be already. Did I leave Zoom? No, I'm still here. Okay, well, we will, my computer seemed to tell me I was leaving Zoom. I'm sorry. I'm back. But yeah, 4M for me was one of the first times that I had the chance to think closely about the extensions beyond the page in a way that wasn't simply a redocumentation, but a way to create new documentations of a process that extends even further. With my friend Neil Gann, I was interested in creating a book that was a web page. It was a web portal to hold an extension of translation as a process that is not simply bearing one thing from one place to another. Here we go. But a process of questions, of moving, of spiraling back again where we started before together to find out what we might find out. Here is what resulted from that collaboration, that time experimenting together. This was with a poem by Elena Salamanca, an incredible poet from El Salvador. This is a, so in this case, we're able to see her poem translating to the zero. That her poem is called Sobre el mito de Santa Tecla, but here we're envisioning this as sort of the translating raised to the 0th power, as this is the poem that's our origin point. We're interested in translating to the one what our sort of first attempt at a translation might be, and how we might read that translation and hear it to know how we might feel about it. How we might move to translating to the two and wondering what it might be to show how a translation comes to be, to lift the veil and see the translation in the making. So we have ways to share our glosses. We have ways to share our initial drafts. We have ways to share how it is that we might take two drafts to find a collective draft. Do we again hold hands, fingers interlacing, three versions together? How do we land on a new second draft that then gives way to new reflections, that gives way to new drafts that we can find of our translation? How do we take this further to figure out what is the way that we can map our translation process, the artifacts of this process, our hesitations, our misdirections, our ways of visualizing what it is that we've done together? Here, can we make a subjective Venn diagram for where our lines overlap in some way, and then create a, uh-oh. I think I'm back. A Venn diagram that allows us to visualize how our readings overlap or do not. Are there other forms of uh, visualization that we can do? Is there correspondence happening behind the scenes that we would typically never see in a translation? Are there other ways of reflecting? Are there other ways of inviting alternative translations from others who have different points of origin, who have different points they may be trying to reach? Okay, I think for time, I'm maybe going to share just one more thing. This is one of the first booklets that I'm able to find from my childhood where I'm writing and thinking about writing. And I see here, the world has a language that consists of no words. Where was this here? Uh-oh, bear with me. I feel the whirlpool of the river, although the river is dry. I'll perhaps end there and thinking about some of my approaches to multilingual book design over the past while, some of the questions that emerge from, some of the questions that perhaps they invite. Okay, looks like somebody is sharing a question on Zoom. I'm not sure exactly
Oh,
what I'm looking at. I like it, but I don't know what it is.
I don't know what that is if you're sharing it. Thank you so much, Ryan, for that beautiful talk and experience. If you have any questions, I think just feel free to put it in the chat or just turn off your mic and go ahead and ask. And maybe while you're thinking, I can start with a question. Um, Ryan, like I feel like, I mean, your work is so beautiful and multi-layered, but I also feel like there's like a strong sense, like you have wandering, like a strong sense of like play throughout your work too. Do you think about that? And like, do you think about that in terms of in like relation to translation as well?
Yeah, I'm glad that that transfers. That feels really central to me. I happen to like poetry. I'm not entirely sure how that happened. There are times when I wish that hadn't happened. Um, I happen to really like translation. It feels perhaps like a snake that's um, yeah, been coiled up and, you know, got its fangs in me somehow, not out of malice, but here we are. Um, I also recognize that a lot of people do not like poetry. I think a lot of that has to do with the ways that many of us encounter poetry for some of the first times in school, when we're often told that there's a hidden meaning, some mine or some gem to mine. If only we would work hard enough, if only we would dig deep enough. If I had dug deep enough at my elementary school, Mercury Mine, under the softball field, I learned in an article yesterday. Apparently, I would have found the remains of a mercury mine, which the article said was safe to eat the dirt. I don't know that I trust that. But I think a lot of us are taught of poetry as a thing that's about mining, that's about some form of extraction. There's a hidden thing here that might be good for me if I only I could find it, if only I could refine it. And it's also a place where I feel many of us encounter writing as a system of rules, as a grid that we struggle to fit ourselves through if we don't follow the straight line where we need to go. I'm interested in ways to present poetry and ways to present books of poetry, to write poetry that invite people to linger who otherwise might not think of poetry as for them, or otherwise might not think of themselves as being for poetry. I feel the same way about translation. It's a type of engagement with writing that from the get-go is almost always immediately told or labeled as impossible. It's a thing marked by loss. What's lost in translation? I think there's perhaps interesting questions there, but I think there's more interesting questions to be asked when yeah, what types of things might be experienced in the course of translation. Again, can we give up an interest in equivalence and instead something about correspondence or correspondancing? I think in making books, especially books of translation, of translated poetry, often sort of strange translated poetry, I'm interested in the ways of making things that might be playful, that you might want to touch because, wow, how does this thing move? Why is it moving in this way? What is there latent and lingering? I'll just say briefly, sorry that I'm very excited about other people's books or other people's writing, but I feel like it's always there with me. This question of latency is something that Ofelia Zepeda represents for me. She is a poet, an autumn poet here from uh, Arizona. She's somebody who has made many of our writing lives possible by the path that she forged as both a poet, a linguist, and an educator. In her book, Ocean Power, Poems from the Desert, there are all of these moments of latency, of a thing about to happen. Summer clouds sit silently, they sit quietly, gathering strength from the good winds, this strength that becomes the thunder so loud it vibrates, the earth, the thunder that surrounds us. Just earlier, black clouds lay off in the distance like black buzzards flying far away, making noise, rumbling, black clouds drifting off in the distance like black buzzards flying so far away, rumbling, thundering. Suddenly, they descend. I'm interested in making books that in some way might give us that feeling of something about to happen. We're not sure necessarily if we want to be a part of what that thing is, but my hope is that the books can be an invitation for people to feel that it's their, yeah, they're welcome to participate in what this book is about to be for them. I think play is a big way to get there. We're all children, always, forever. I work in a library with children. These are things I enjoy.
Thanks, Ryan. A couple things in the chat. Angie writes, I'll keep my mic off because I'm sick. Feel better, I hope. But I'm so inspired by the way you turn inside out the idea of translation being an invisible effort that leads to a final resting form. Then Robin looks like has a couple questions. I think I heard you mention translation can be conquest. I was curious if I have this right, and if so, could you expand a little on that?
Yeah. Um, I think there are many other people who've thought about this and articulated it a lot more deeply than I probably can. So yeah, I'd point you to again, a manifesto for ultra translation, which is available for free on the sort of archival site for Antena Aire. which was a collaboration that lasted a decade between 2010 and 2020. I believe those were the years. Um, but yeah, I think translation is not a neutral act, just like writing is not a neutral act, just like books are not a neutral object. And translation, if we think about the ways it's accompanied colonization in terms of sort of attempts for conversion, some of the very messy and ongoing history of anthropology and types of cultural extraction. Um, I think that there are ways that translation has historical connections to some form of mining, have the idea that there's something somewhere else that we might take because it's shiny or glimmery, or also that there's something that we want to bring somewhere that perhaps somebody doesn't want from us. Um, but just like writing, just like books, translation too is something that I think has a lot of space and is really ample in forcing some questions that allow for us to think about aesthetics, politics, and access in an intertangled braid. Just briefly speaking of braids, I think it's really interesting that so much of my experience with multilingual work has to do with even numbers, of there being two languages, um, because of paper being an object that folds in half. I think I'm really interested and would love to learn more about people who have done cool things to explore odd number of language translations. So trilingual work, what are interesting book designs that don't prioritize a certain reading order? A few days ago, Kathy, who I mentioned earlier, and I ran a workshop at the American Literary Translators Association conference where we met a lot of very cool and wonderful people talking about some of these questions, which I can share really briefly. Thank you, Kathy, for being open to me sharing our webpage. And it feels like this talk is, or whatever this is, this show and tell feels related in some way. Okay, so this also was called Tongue Twist instead of Tongue Twisted. We were animated by some similar questions. Oh man, they're going to take a second to load here. About the context in which we maybe typically in daily life and literature find multiple languages, patient info leaflets at the doctor's office, instruction manuals, intake forms in healthcare. What are current forms we can identify in books that assume particular types of relationships, of hierarchy, chronology, paratext, external text, other versions of text, but also how we might imagine other forms of these things. So if you're ever interested in sort of sharing thoughts, this is a place for, at least for now, we're starting to gather strategies, experiments, thoughts in the direction of ways to destabilize clear, like clear linearity in the presentation of multiple languages, both in print and online. I've been doing a lot of work over the past several years that I've been calling transfluxions, that are some experiments that are interactive digital translations that allow for readers to participate in some way and for text to move and shift and preserve their indeterminacy. Anyway, I'll stop sharing so my computer isn't having as hard of a time, if it will let me. Okay. I hope that starts to speak to your question. I'm sorry that became really long, but like all of this, I think it's a wandering.
Thanks, Ryan. Are there any other questions or comments before we close out? In the meantime, I will say if you are interested in joining CBAA as a member, I'm putting the link in the chat. There are sliding scale memberships. If you are interested, and even if you don't become a member, you are welcome to our next book art series talk, which will be in December. So please join again for that. It will be, I have not pinned down the exact time with the artists, but it will be an evening in mid-December, the week of December 15th again. So please be on the lookout for that. And join CBAA and the mailing list if you would like to keep informed on what's going on. And if I don't see anything else coming in, so thank you again so much for that, Ryan. It was so beautiful. Lots of heart
Thank you.
explosions.
Yeah, thank you all
And
for
yeah,
your
the
patience
talk
with
will
all that too.
also be posted on CBAA's YouTube channel. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna close it out.
All right,
Thank
thank
you
you,
for
Annika, so much.
joining.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.
You too.